I've never copped a storm before. I've given a few storms out. G'day, Mum and Dad. There's my mum and dad on a photo. They can stay there. Hello, everybody. How's everyone doing? How's everyone doing tonight? How's everybody doing tonight? Fourth time. How's everyone doing? Did everyone answer there? Yeah, we need to get warm. I've got a bit of a challenge for you throughout the next couple of minutes while I'm speaking. When I say the words complete picture, and you hear me, I'm not going to cue you in, but when I say complete picture, I want you to scream out the words complete picture as loud as you can. Okay? As the words drop, scream it back at me. All right? Bit of a quick test. I'm going to be talking complete picture. Yeah, very good, very good. So we'll tuck into that a little bit later. But I assume that there'll be some moments where everyone forgets and there'll be like a couple of people, and I'm pumped for that because that'll be funny. Now tonight, we've got on the back wall here, giver of life, giver of life. We're going to be talking about Jesus. He's our guy. Now, we're talking about Jesus tonight as a response to the Insta poll that we put out with you guys, and we said, what would you like to chat about this year at CY? Jesus is one of the big ones. So we said, all right, we're throwing that in. That's going to be a topic this year. Jesus is the topic tonight, the giver of life. Can I just get you to turn to the person beside you? Start off just by introducing yourself. I need you to know the person beside you. Take 10 seconds. Make sure you know their name. Now, I just said name. I don't want you to get the complete picture. Oh, a couple heard it. All right. How'd you go? As I said, you're just getting their name, not the complete picture. There we go. We're still with it. Okay, now that you've met that person, I'm going to give you 10 seconds to have a think and just say to them, if tonight's about Jesus, what are you hoping or expecting to learn tonight? If it's about Jesus, what are you hoping or expecting to learn tonight? Turn to the person you just met. What are you hoping or expecting to learn when we talk about Jesus, the giver of life? All right, how we go? I've got a massive drink bottle up here, and I actually lost it. Did anyone come to the Crossway team launch a couple of weeks ago? We had a big water slide outside and stuff. So I went on the water slide, and I went and got changed because I was soaking wet in the change room. And then I never saw my drink bottle again. And Alex messaged me this week, Alec, and he said, hey, is this your drink bottle? And it just filled my heart with joy because he found what was once lost. So thank you, Alec, from the bottom of my heart. All right. So, Jesus. What do you think of when you think of Jesus? So let me just explain what you're looking at here. On the far left, you've got Michelangelo's picture of Jesus on the Sistine Chapel wall over in Italy. I went to see that once. It was pretty impressive. Right in the middle here, you've got the actor Jim Caviezel. He played Jesus in The Passion of the Christ. Put your fist in the air if you've seen The Passion of the Christ before. That's a pretty crazy movie. Pretty crazy movie. And then on the far right here, hands in the air if you've ever seen that face before. A couple of people have. Let me explain. So a couple of years ago, this was one of those big clickbait articles blowing up, right? And it was saying scientists reckon that they have the face of the real Jesus. and they've made it up, and this is probably what he looked like. That's him. What I like about it, when I compare it to the other two, is that he was from the Arab area. So that he's probably sort of more in that direction than like the white guy with blue eyes, right? He was from Israel. But I always thought it was pretty funny that they thought that they had Jesus nailed down. Like someone chose like that he had that bit of cowlick at the top, like that it was fuzzed up there. And I just always thought that was funny that they could try and recreate from 2,000 years ago what this dude looked like. So I don't really believe that is exactly what Jesus looked like, but I don't mind that they've given it a crack because it's, scientifically accurate for the area. So what do you think of when you think of Jesus? I'm reminded of that Will Ferrell movie, Talladega Nights, and when he prays to baby Jesus all the time because he prefers that Jesus. He prefers to think of the baby Jesus and the other ones. What do you think of? What do we know of him? Do we know of him? Do we know him personally? Can we even know something that happened so long ago and doesn't matter? Now, I'd like you, I've had a couple of turn to your partners. You got one more coming up. I want you to have a think about the first words you said this morning, not when you're a baby. What do you reckon the first words were that you said this morning? And I want you to report that to the person beside you. What were the first words you said this morning? Put your hands in the air if you have no idea what the first words were that you said this morning. Yeah, a few of us. A few of us have no idea. Even 12 hours ago was too long ago for the memory of some. I propose to you that it's probably because those words weren't that significant. I'm sure that if this morning you were dumped out of your mattress into like a pool of water and you woke up gasping for air, you'd probably remember the first words you said because they were significant. But if it was just like, "G'day, Mum. Got up, how'd you sleep, Dad? Yeah, good to see you. Yeah, going to school, good." That was kind of it. Insignificant, you probably wouldn't remember. Who had something funny that they said first up this morning? Their partner said, anyone? Yeah, what'd you have? I did a poo. As the first words of the day. I need a poo. Oh, said it to yourself? Okay, very good. Someone get Kidney some help? Nah, just kidding. Good boy. I used to have a mate in high school, and he would make up the most outlandish lies. That was just his vibe. Like he was old enough to know better. But he'd just say the craziest stuff, and he'd be telling us about when he was overseas, that he had this crazy car, that he was actually a professional golfer, that he had all these beautiful girlfriends, and he was super successful. And we were looking at this year 11 kid who was not good at sport, and it just did not line up for us. But it was just funny, I remember thinking, because there was no way to prove it. Because he was like, nah, it happened overseas, and it happened a few years ago. Before I knew you guys, that was my life. Anyway, things have changed. Here we are now. He just made up a whole lot of trash and lies, and there was no way to check. There was no way to check. Similar to your words this morning. I got no way to check if they were right or not. Now, I used to ride a longboard, a skateboard, right? Still got it in my garage. I got it out the other day, and I rode it to the shops. And if I'm honest with you, I was thinking to myself, my age, while I rode a skateboard to the shops. And I know that, I shouldn't think like that. I can ride a skateboard whenever. But I was on this skateboard, and I used to bomb these hills, right? These really steep roads. Me and a few mates would get on our boards, and we'd bomb these hills. And I remember thinking to myself, we are going so fast down these roads. I've driven in plenty of cars. I know speed limits pretty well. I'm going at least 60 Ks on this board. And one day I was like, you know what? I've got a GPS on my phone. I'm going to get my GPS fired up. It can tell me how fast I'm going. And I'll ride my skateboard and check it while I'm at my fastest point, and it'll tell me what I'm at. I assume it'd be 60 plus, right? Any ideas how fast I was actually going at the fastest point on this hill? Someone said 10, some said 20. About 16 Ks. 16 Ks, and it felt so fast. And one time, one of my ball bearings blew out and a wheel came off while I was at the top speed, and my board just ground to a halt, and I just had to sprint off at only 16 Ks, which is not even that fast. But it felt so quick. And it was amazing that this thing that I told myself, 60 Ks, for sure, at least 60, I could verify with proof and see that I was way off. That was not a truth, much like my lying mate in school. So when we speak about Jesus, do we speak about a dude that really existed? Do we speak about a historical guy that actually walked on the earth? Do we actually speak about God? Was he actually the Son of God? Was he who he claimed to be? Was it all just a myth? Is it all just a story? What is the evidence, and is there proof, and can we tell if it's true? Tonight, I hope we'll start out. We will not get the complete picture. Oh, a couple of sleepers in the room. We'll not get the complete picture, but I hope we'll get a good, strong foundation that you can do backflips off in your own time. So, atheists might challenge that Jesus was a real guy. He was a good teacher. He was a prophet. Do you know the Muslim faith, Islam, says that Jesus was a prophet. He was a real guy, but he wasn't the Son of God. So they say he existed, but he wasn't who he said he was. And then you might have atheists that say the whole thing's a myth. He never walked the earth. What can we actually see? What can we actually see from the evidence? What does it say? Has anyone here done Youth Alpha before? Hands up if you've done Youth Alpha before. They have a fantastic episode, and it mentions a few of the stats around Jesus, and I found it really helpful when I was trying to get my head around this and the evidence. So the New Testament is the book where Jesus is in it, right? So we've got the Old and the New. We'll get to that in a second. But there are actually sources outside of the Bible from history. We've got a guy called Josephus. He was a historian from the 1st century. We've got two other dudes who will try to say their names. Say them with me. Tacitus and Suetonius. Historians that we know were legit. We take their stuff into consideration when we think about history. Bless you. They spoke about Jesus from outside of the Bible. There are more mentions of Jesus in ancient writings than Tiberius Caesar, who was the ruler of the Roman Empire. Someone who no one would question really existed. There are more mentions of Jesus than even he in ancient writings. The evidence is strong that this was an actual dude, despite what he said. There's evidence outside the New Testament. Now, when we get to the New Testament, we have actual eyewitness accounts. So if in your mind you say, all right, we need to find outside of the Bible, if we have some evidence, I want you to remember that the Bible is made up of 66 different books and letters, right? So we don't just discount the Bible and say that's all out. We need to find evidence elsewhere. We can say, all right, each of the different books, the 66 books in the Bible, 39 in the Old Testament, 27 in the New, they are each written by different people at different times throughout history. We can take them each on their own accord, and we can have a look at the evidence. Now, if we have a look at the New Testament, the stuff that involves Jesus, this Youth Alpha video has this fantastic breakdown, and it shows these historical documents, and it says, how do we know if something from history is true? How do we know it's true? We look at when it was written down, and we see how quickly after the event in history happened, did the writings that we have about it take place? And obviously, the smaller that gap is, if someone wrote about it the next couple of years or the next couple of decades, then it's probably going to be more likely to be close to the truth than if it was thousands or millions of years later, you'd agree. So we look at some historical documents that we have, and a couple of the big ones from history that we would have based our history off in what you're learning at school. They say are between 900 to 1300 years after the event is the oldest document that we have. And the other test is how many copies of the document there are. And so in most instances, there's less than maybe 5. There might be up to 8. In a really good document, there's 20, okay? And 900 plus years between the event and the copy that we have. Now, how do you think the New Testament stacks up as far as its historical reliability? Are you still with me? Yep. Complete picture? The New Testament is dated between 30 and 100 years, generously, between the dates of the events happening and when it was written down. A single lifetime, a single generation. And of those other ones where there's 8, 20 copies of these documents, the New Testament has 5,000 Greek manuscripts, 10,000 Latin manuscripts, and 9,300 other language copies of what's written in the New Testament today. How's that? How does that stack up for your historical? Yeah, you can clap that. Give that a round of applause. Why not? The New Testament stands totally alone in how reliable historically it is. And do you know what's crazy? The start of the New Testament, the Gospels, the 4 books, that's all about Jesus. All of it is about Jesus. Historically, completely reliable. Historians all say Jesus was definitely a man. And all of what Jesus says through that New Testament is, I and the Father are one. I am God. All these claims of who he was. Historically, you'd find yourself hard-pressed to come across a historian that didn't believe that Jesus existed as a man. I found myself watching this debate, right? I love this kind of stuff, and I spend my spare time in it. I fire up YouTube if I'm doing the dishes or cleaning the house, and I found this debate about the historicity of Jesus. And what I found really funny, one historian was arguing black and blue that Jesus was an actual man, although he didn't believe all the miracle stuff or the God stuff. But he said he was definitely a man, 100%. He'd written books about it. You can look him up. His name's Bart Ehrman. The guy that he was debating against was this full-on atheist who was saying, no, all a myth, did not happen. What I found really funny, both of these guys were atheists, both sitting on different sides of whether the man of Jesus existed or not. The guy who said all of it's a myth, he was like, how can you believe that this was a man and he actually existed and not believe any of the stuff that he said or did? He was comparing it to Clark Kent and Superman. He said, Superman we know about because he's Superman. But if this guy was just Clark Kent and he'd done nothing special, we wouldn't know about him and he wouldn't have changed history. For 2,000 years later, we're still talking about the guy. If he's just a man, we don't know about him. You cannot have the man Jesus without the God. And this guy was arguing, you cannot say that he didn't exist. He was calling this guy a fool. And I just found that was marvelously ironic that these two atheists could not see eye to eye on this Jesus, because you can't have it halfway. Either Jesus was fully who he said he was, existed, raised from the dead, fully God, or complete myth, but you'd be stupid to think complete myth because of what history tells us. Now, if we have a look at the Old Testament, is Alex in the building right now? Is she in the room? Is that Alex? No? Yeah? Can we thank Alex for last week? Speaking about, I'm pointing, oh, there you are, g'day. For talking about how the whole Bible points to Jesus, right? And I'm going to give us a quick Old Testament lesson, okay, as we dive into Jesus, because Alex was right. The whole Old Testament points to this Messiah who will come. The whole Old Testament says this is the guy, and then after Jesus' time, it says that was the guy. It's all pointing to this Jesus guy. So can I get you up to your feet, please? We're just going to do a quick Old Testament test. Make sure you're still with me. and you have your knowledge about you? Oh, we got our first one on the screen here. I'm going back. Okay. Now, how this is going to work, you can tell I like audience participation because it tells me you're still awake with me. When a name comes up, there'll be an Old Testament person. I want you to yell out what you associate them with. So it might be just a single word, or you might have to say, they were the guy that died on the cross. Something like that, except that's not Old Testament. Here we go. All right, person number one. Ready? Go. Who? First man ever made. Yep. Who was his girlfriend? Eve. Right on. I don't know. Yeah, maybe not girlfriend. Adam. Fantastic. So we got Adam in the Garden of Eden. Well done. Who's this guy? Yeah, I heard father of. Yeah. Father of a multitude. Father of many people. So Abraham was the dude that God gave a promise to, and he said, Abraham, you're going to have hundreds and thousands of descendants. And he was real old, and it was miraculous that he told him that. All right, next. I can't really hear any words. Bugs Bunny? No. Joseph, he had the Technicolor Dreamcoat, right? He went to Egypt. Maybe as long as the person next to you can understand what you're saying, that's the important part. He went to Egypt and he could understand dreams, right? Next person. Person next to you. So Moses was this dude. He led the Israelites, God's people, out of Egypt. He parted the Red Sea with God's help. He led the Israelites out of Egypt. He was the guy who got given the 10 Commandments. Everyone say 10 Commandments. He got given the 10 Commandments, the big rules. And he led the Israelite people throughout the desert for 40 years. Now, what's special about Moses, he wrote the first 5 books of the Old Testament, right? The first 5 books we have. And he is known as being the law. So the law of Moses. So the 10 Commandments were the law, how we should live. And when you see Moses, you think the law. Okay, next person. A bit more difficult. Person next to you. Do we know this guy? Elijah? Yes, well done. I heard the word prophet down the front here. So similar to Moses, Elijah's a special guy. When you see Elijah, I want you to think prophet. A prophet's a guy who speaks toward the future, what will happen, what will come. Elijah was a prophet. Now, who have we got next? Yeah, I think I heard the word king. All right, grab a seat. Well done. While this is a good knowledge of the Old Testament, it's not quite the complete picture. Oh, very good. Not quite the complete picture. But it is setting us up for what's to come. Now, as you look at these names, you've got here Adam, the man, the bloodline, the first one created of God. You've got Abraham, who God said, you will have thousands of descendants. They will be my people. Then you've got Joseph, who was the dude with the fancy coat. That's why he's on the list. You've got Moses, who was what was that word? The law. Well done. Then you've got Elijah, who was the prophet. Then you've got David, who was the king. Well done. So this is basically the Old Testament people and all the stories that surround them summarized, and they're all pointing toward a better way. This is not a complete picture. God designed the earth well with Adam and Eve. Things broke up there. And then time after time, like the Israelites were the people of God that are part of all that story. And they kept on saying, we want a leader, someone that will make things right. Because God had promised to make things right. And David was almost as close as they got. He was a man after God's own heart. He was a good king, but even he fell in totally the wrong direction, as you'll know from the story of David. So we end the Old Testament looking toward this Messiah. Let me give you a bit of a picture of the Jewish climate, the people of God, the climate that we're leaving the Old Testament. These people, the Jews, know all the stories that you've just mentioned, the people you just mentioned really well. They study them all the time. So they know the Old Testament back to front. The 10 Commandments, the law, were in full effect. People were following those and many other laws really strictly. The people were quite religious. There was kind of a separation between the religious guys and the rest of the people. And there was this separation between like the good and the church and the clean and the holy and everyone else who was sinful and bad. And there was this sacrificial system. Everyone say sacrifice. There was a sacrificial system where the priest would be at the temple. And the priest had a job once a year that he'd be able to creep under this big veil, a massive curtain, and go into this special place which was the presence of God once a year on behalf of the people of God to cleanse them of their sins. He'd make a sacrifice. But throughout normal life, people have said that priests are almost like butchers. They were up to their waist in animal blood because people just kept on bringing in animals to keep on getting the priest to kill them, to be making sacrifices for their sins. Because as the people of God, they knew that their sin had separated them from God. So this is where we pick up the New Testament, this climate of Jewish people and all these stories really well known and in the forefront of their mind. Now, where do we get to? New Testament. What's at the start of the New Testament? Matthew, Mark, Luke. Oh, how's that? They started in a nice clean line. There you go. We'll see how that formats itself as we go on from here. But we've got the 4 Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. Now this next little bit of information that I'm about to tell you was very dear to me when I came across it, and it helped me in my Bible studies very well when I'm looking at the Gospels. So Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John are the guys that write about Jesus and his life. Can I tell you, they were not there to write down his biography or his history. They were not there to record the events for history's sake and to say this is the guy. We can take a lot of events in history from what they wrote, and we do, but they actually each had a message that they wrote their particular gospel or their particular book about Jesus. They had a certain message in mind. Now Matthew, is that going to pop up underneath him? Yep, pretty well. Matthew's message was this: Jesus is the Messiah. He's the Messiah. His focus is what Jesus said. If you're looking to find out what Jesus said, you can look at Matthew. He'll have it all laid out there and he won't miss a single thing. If you look in the different Gospels, they sometimes miss things that the other ones pick up. And I started asking, why is that? Why don't they all tell the same story? They've all got a different message. So Matthew, everyone say Matthew, what Jesus said. Next, Mark. Yeah, it's going to be weird when it gets to John. His picture's going to be over here. Mark, he said Jesus is this servant. If you read through the Old Testament, you'll hear this story of the suffering servant. That's God's Messiah. That's who will know who he is. He's the servant. And what do we know about servants? They clean, they do stuff, they look after people. So Mark's gospel is all about what Jesus did. You'll see a whole lot about what he did in there, which says that he is this servant, this person spoken about in the Old Testament. So we have a picture, Matthew writes and says, all that stuff in the Old Testament, what the Messiah will be like, this is all of it written here. Mark says, where it says about a servant, this is all of it here. This is the kind of guy that he was. This is all the stuff that he did. When we look at Luke, Luke says he was actually a man. So when we're looking at the historical man of Jesus, it's all in Luke, if you're keen to check that out. He says what Jesus felt. He gives an account of Jesus, what he felt as he went through all the things that he went through, which are pretty significant. And then John, which is the final one, if you can follow me there, Matthew, Mark, Luke, John. John says this guy was actually God. He was actually God. He wasn't just a guy. This is what he was. He was God in person. And what's real cool, actually, have you seen those bits in the Bible where it says Dave was the father of Jono, was the father of Keith, was the father of Bruce? Those are all the genealogies. These books each have a genealogy at the start, but you mightn't know that. Now, Matthew's, that says he's the Messiah, he's the Jewish one you've been waiting for, his genealogy starts with Abraham, who we spoke about before. So it says to the Jews, he's from the line of Abraham that God said would be my people. He's from that line. So he's a Jew like you guys. This guy's legit. And then Mark, who says he's a servant, he doesn't have a genealogy at all. Because who cares about a servant's genealogy? He wasn't trying to prove that he was a king, wasn't trying to prove that he was a Jewish leader, he wasn't trying to prove that he was God. He was saying Jesus was a servant. This is what he did. No genealogy. If you look at Luke, who is saying he was a man, his genealogy starts at Adam. Adam. He says he's from an actual bloodline of men, real people, from the first created man in God's image, Adam. His bloodline runs down. And John, does anyone know the first part of John? We read through it in the Bible reading plan last month. The first part of John says, in the beginning was the Word. The Word was with God and the Word was God. And if Jesus is God, that functions as his genealogy. It says he was right back when creation began. No other men need to be involved in Jesus' genealogy if he is God. Isn't that cool? Isn't that a cool tool? I hope you'll use that. Any one of these, actually I'll go back. Any one of these pictures of Jesus, can I go back? Yeah, look at that. Any one of these pictures of Jesus, you'll get something from, but it won't be a complete picture. Any one of these, you'll get some, but it won't be a complete picture. You have to see Jesus as each of these things, and you'll understand the beauty of this story from Old Testament to New. And I'm telling you, you will fall in love with it like I have. Now I'm going to rush through Jesus' life. Everyone say Jesus' life. When you turned to your neighbor at the start and said what you were hoping to get out of tonight, I'm sure some of you said, I want to know a bit about what happened with Jesus. So we're going to smash through it. This is him. He was born in where? Bethlehem. Fantastic. What year, do you know? Oh, very good. Some switched on people in the house. So any years that are super old, we call them AD because it's before Christ, which means Anno Domini, before the year of our Lord. Sorry, AD is after. BC, before Christ. Born in Bethlehem. His childhood, he was we last hear about him in the New Testament as a 12-year-old kid, and he's doing the wrong thing at the temple. According to his parents, they couldn't find him and they run back. And then we've got this dark period where we don't really hear about him much in the Bible. It is said that he would have then gone as a 12-year-old and become an apprentice to his father's trade. And we know that Joseph, people say carpenter, but I think more closely it would be builder, and that would have been more like a stonemason. So he worked with stones and rocks, but he was a builder with his dad, probably for that whole time between 12 and 30. At 30 years old is when we start hearing about him in the Gospels after he was a kid. He was baptized in the Jordan River. That's the Jordan River there for all of you visuals like me who like to see what things look like. When he was baptized, does anyone know what happened? A dove came down from the sky, and this voice came down from the sky affirming that this is my son from God. This is my son, with him I'm well pleased. So there was this affirmation of his godness when he was baptized. He was tempted in the wilderness for 40 days, and then he started his ministry. He had his ministry sort of between the age of 30 years and 33 years. That was kind of all the stories you know about Jesus happened in that little 3-year window. Isn't that pretty crazy? Everyone say 3 years. How old will you be in 3 years' time? Old. Isn't that pretty special? When we look at Jesus, we know that this guy was sold out to the cause of his Father, and so much good stuff happened in those years. Now I'm going to power through here because I want us to finish well. We've got the transfiguration. You may or may not know that. That's when he went up the mountain with his three closest disciples, Peter, James, and John, and he shone, and his clothes changed, and he turned into like what we might expect all our bodies might look like when one day Christ returns. And Moses, who represents the law, and Elijah, who was a prophet, appeared on the mountain. And it was as if to say the law and the prophet, which is like the Old Testament, came together, and then another voice came down from heaven confirming again, this is my son. This is the culmination of the law and the prophets. So that was his transfiguration. He had his trial and his crucifixion, which I'm sure you'll know about when we see he went up on the cross. There's this amazing stuff. Read it in your own time. Isaiah 53. If you have a notebook or something, Isaiah 53, read it in your own time, written far before Jesus. Amazing account of what he will go through, written hundreds of years before Jesus ever existed, talking about the crucifixion. And when he finally said, it is finished, and he breathed his last breath, that curtain that I told you about, that the priests would have to crawl under once a year to go into God's presence, it was torn from top to bottom. Top to bottom. So no man could have done it from bottom to top. It was torn from top to bottom to show that this old way was no more and the presence of God could be accessed now. Finally, these butcher priests that have been killing animals all day, every day, finally a sacrifice that actually pays for sins has been made. God's presence is now accessible for us all, and no more sacrifices need be made. So Jesus claims, I and the Father are one. He said, I am God. Everyone expected that this Jewish leader would come and overthrow the Roman Empire and rule forever and live forever and come in power. But actually, when Jesus came to be crucified, he overthrew the temple. And then he died a sinner's death, nailed to a cross. And then he rose again, defeated death 3 days later. All of his followers had all their hopes on him. He rose again 3 days later. And for 40 days, he was appearing to his followers. For 40 days, people saw him in the flesh and they couldn't believe it. And they needed to put their fingers in the spear hole in his side to prove it was really him, and it really was. And that's historically accounted so many times, that after this man died, he was seen, risen again, had defeated death. There are over 400 prophecies from the Old Testament of Jesus coming, the Son of God, to deal with this situation on earth that humankind had gotten ourselves into. And he came and fulfilled every single one of them. Please go and do your research. You'll get so much out of it. He fulfilled every single one of them, which would be impossible unless he actually was the Messiah, the Son of God, here to die for us. Even this, what I've said tonight, is not the complete picture. There's still more to come. We're in this age now where things are different. We have access to God and his power. Jesus has paid the price. We are now clean and we're seen as worthy before God to come to God and be in relationship with him. What an amazing time to be alive. But one day, there's more to come. One day there's more to come. This is not the complete picture. Now this Jesus is the one life that was given for you. Do you know him? One life given for you. Do you know him? One of our themes for this year. I reckon Jesus is concerned so much more with your heart than the knowledge of all this stuff. The knowledge of all this stuff can help, but he's so much more concerned with your heart. He said that a whole lot when he taught. So much of my relationship with Jesus has come from personally getting alone with him and hearing from him, speaking into my real life situation, and in community like this. Praying with other people. Jesus speaks through us when we pray for each other, when we open ourselves up to him. So much of what I know about Jesus and how I know Jesus personally comes from that relational piece, either me and him or me with pretty much you guys in my journey. And that's kind of the reason we come here on a Friday night, right? To learn about that one and to be in community with one another, trying to do God's will amongst each other. So in a moment, we've got a few questions on the board here. We're going to give you a bit of time. We were just going to finish with the questions, if I'm totally honest with you. But I felt God put on my heart, and it was actually confirmed by a couple of people, that this should be a time of prayer for one another. Now, I know some of you will freak out at the idea of praying for other people right now, so don't worry. The questions are where we're going to go. So we've got, what is your biggest question about Jesus? I wonder if the thing you wanted to learn tonight actually got spoken about. Maybe it didn't. If everything we know about Jesus is true, what does this mean for you and me now? I'd love you to talk to just the people around you about that. And then third one, who is one person that you know that needs to hear about Jesus? Who's your one? Who's your one? They may or may not be in the room tonight, but who's your one? So I'm going to give you a few minutes to talk about those questions. While you're talking, you may have on your heart that you'd like to take a bit of a step of faith, maybe find someone in the room and pray for them in the name of this Jesus, who really was, who was the Son of God, who died for us and makes a way possible to access the love and power of God here and now. You might like to pray for one another. So we're going to maybe have 5 minutes answering through questions, and then I'd love, if you feel bold, pray with one another, the people around you, in Jesus' name. Pray with one another. Then we're going to have time for a couple of songs. Do we still have time for a couple of songs? A song? Maybe not. We have also, just a total side note, an Insta poll up. If you'd love your question answered and it wasn't answered tonight, once we're done, you can jump on Instagram and submit your question there. However, turn amongst yourselves in 2s, 3s, or 4s and answer those questions with one another, and I'd love you to pray.